Let me tell you something that most people will never admit out loud. The scariest person in the room is never the loudest one. You've met the loud ones, the ones who can't let a conversation end without winning it, the ones who raise their voice when they're losing the argument, the ones who need the last word like they need oxygen. Those people? Easy. Completely, embarrassingly, easy. You want to control someone like that? Criticize them once. Just once. Watch what happens. Watch how fast the mask falls. Watch how fast confident turns into desperate. The arrogant man is a puppet, and his ego is the string. But there's another type of person, and this one is different. You say something sharp to them, nothing. You try to embarrass them in front of others, nothing. You pull away your attention, your approval, your validation, nothing. And that nothing, that complete unbothered eerie silence, starts doing something strange to people. It gets under their skin. And that is the most disorienting thing one person can do to another in a room full of people. It makes them question themselves. It makes them feel like they're the one losing, and they don't even know why. That's the lone wolf. The lone wolf didn't read a book about this. He lived long enough to watch every single one of those hooks get used on him by people he trusted. And one by one, quietly, without announcement, without a dramatic conversation about it, he removed them, not out of coldness, out of memory. And that is exactly what makes them dangerous. Part 1. Let's talk about arrogance, the real kind. Schopenhauer said something that most people laugh at until they're old enough to know he was right. He said the social world is almost entirely performance, not connection, not honesty, not people showing you who they are. Performance, an audition that never ends for an audience that's too busy auditioning back to actually watch. The lone wolf looked at that stage one day and walked off it. He just stopped showing up for rehearsal. And the people still on stage called it arrogance. Because what else do you call someone who doesn't need what you've been killing yourself to earn? Society has a confused relationship with arrogance. Most people look at someone who's loud, who brags, who walks in like they own the building, and they think, that person is confident. No, they're not. That person is terrified. Genuine confidence doesn't need a stage. It doesn't need applause. It doesn't need you to agree. Arrogance is what happens when someone's sense of self is being held outside their own body, in other people's opinions, in social status, in winning, in being right. Their identity isn't inside them. It's out there, floating around in what people think of them, which means every time someone challenges that, they go to war, not because they're strong, because they're fragile. Picture this. Someone walks into a meeting. Someone else casually disagrees with their idea. And instead of saying, interesting point, let's explore it, they go stiff. Their jaw tightens. They repeat themselves louder. They start listing their accomplishments. They make it personal. Why? Because somewhere in that disagreement, they didn't just hear your idea might be wrong. They heard, you are not enough. And they couldn't sit with that, because their entire sense of self depends on not hearing that. Here's the dark truth about arrogant people. They're not hard to handle. They're predictable systems. You learn the triggers, and you own them. Praise them when you need a yes. Challenge them when you need them distracted. Question their status when you need to watch them spiral. They think they're running the room, but they're the most easily manipulated people in it, because anything that reacts on command can be controlled. Write that down somewhere. Part 2, the lone wolf. Let's get into it. Now let's talk about the one who doesn't react. The one who sits in the corner of the room and says almost nothing. Not because they have nothing to say, because they've already decided most of what's being said isn't worth their voice. That's the lone wolf psychology. And it's built on one foundation that most people spend their entire lives running from. Not needing others' approval. Not needing others' validation. Not needing to be understood by others. Not needing to win this conversation. And when someone reaches that point, the psychological tools that most people unconsciously use on each other every single day stop working. Think about how human beings actually control each other. Not the dramatic, obvious control. The subtle kind. The kind happening in every office, every friendship group, every family. I'm disappointed in you. Control through guilt. Everyone thinks you're wrong about this. Control through social pressure. I might not be here if you keep doing this. Control through fear of loss. I'll only respect you if... Control through conditional approval. These are the levers, and they work beautifully on people who are still emotionally attached to those outcomes. But the lone wolf, they've been quietly, methodically, detaching from every single one of them. Guilt doesn't land. Pressure slides off. Fear of loss doesn't cause panic. And approval. They stopped chasing that so long ago they barely remember what it felt like to need it. And when you remove all the levers, there's nothing left to pull. No control. No influence. No leverage. And people feel that deeply, even if they can't name it. Here's a scene that might feel familiar. Group of people. Someone gets misunderstood. Maybe someone spread a rumor. Maybe someone painted them in a bad light. And everyone around them scrambles. Their friends jump in to defend. People over-explain on their behalf. There's noise, drama, emotional energy flying everywhere. And the lone wolf sits quietly. Lets it play out. Doesn't defend. Doesn't correct. Doesn't perform outrage. And people look at them and think, why aren't they saying anything? Don't they care? But that's not what's happening inside. What's happening inside is a cold, calm calculation. He's running a calculation so fast it looks like stillness. Is this worth my energy? Most of the time, the answer is no. Not because they don't care about the truth, but because they understand something most people don't. Defending yourself to people who've already decided what they believe is just energy you'll never get back. Marcus Aurelius ran an empire and wrote in his private journal that the only thing he ever actually owned was his next response. Not the outcome, not the verdict, not whether people understood him correctly. Just his response. The lone wolf lives this not as philosophy, but as survival skill learned the hard way. He stopped trying to manage what people thought of him in rooms he wasn't in, and the energy that came back from that decision was staggering. Because most people spend half their lives performing for audiences who aren't watching for a verdict that will never fully satisfy them, even if it goes their way. That's the part that should make you think. Part 3, why people call it dangerous. Here's what actually unsettles people about the lone wolf. It's not aggression, it's unpredictability. And unpredictability breaks the human brain in a very specific way. We are pattern-seeking creatures. Every single one of us, we need to be able to predict the people around us, because predictability means safety. Predictability means control. Someone who's always loud, you know what to expect. Someone who always gets emotional, you know how to navigate them. Someone who always needs to win, you know exactly which buttons to push and which ones to avoid. But someone who just doesn't react the way they're supposed to, that creates a specific psychological discomfort, a kind of tension that hums quietly in the back of your mind, because people can't map them. They can't predict them. They can't control the interaction. And without control of the interaction, they feel exposed. You know that feeling when someone says something slightly aggressive to you, expecting a reaction, and you just look at them calmly, maybe even with the faintest hint of amusement, and say nothing. What happens to them in that moment? They start filling the silence themselves. They over-explain. They backtrack. They spiral. And the lone wolf didn't say a single word to make that happen. The silence did it. Their stillness did it. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is pressure. The Taoists had a concept for this. Wu Wei, effortless non-action. The idea that the most powerful force in nature doesn't push. It doesn't argue. It doesn't force its way through. It simply remains. The art of not forcing. Water doesn't argue with what's in its path. It doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't make its case. It doesn't need the rock to admit it was wrong. Water doesn't fight the rock. It just keeps being water. And eventually, the rock moves. The lone wolf understands this instinctively. Their silence works exactly like this. You don't need to respond to every attack. You don't need to defend every misunderstanding. You just need to remain exactly who you are and let the noise exhaust itself around you. Silence forces the other person to reveal themselves. It forces them to fill the space. It makes them question their own behavior. It flips the entire dynamic. without a single aggressive move, and most people have no defense against it, because most people were never taught to sit with silence. They were taught to fill it, to perform, to explain themselves. The lone wolf didn't sign that contract. And here's the thing about social games. Most people are playing them constantly. Every conversation has a layer underneath it. Someone's trying to establish status, someone's looking for validation, someone's positioning themselves above someone else, someone's collecting social points. It's exhausting. It's everywhere. And most people don't even realize they're doing it, because it's just how humans learn to function in groups. The lone wolf sees it, all of it, and opts out, not to be superior, not to look mysterious. They just don't find the game worth playing. They defined their own values a long time ago, and those values don't require the herd's applause. Friedrich Nietzsche talked about this. The individual who steps outside the crowd's moral framework, who stops measuring themselves by the standards of people they don't even respect, who creates their own meaning, not louder, not in rebellion, just quietly sovereign. That's the lone wolf. Part 4, the deeper layer. The part most videos won't touch. Let's go deeper, because the lone wolf psychology isn't just about being unbothered. It's about a very specific kind of awareness. Carl Jung called it shadow work. The idea that every human being carries a shadow, a hidden side, the parts of yourself you don't acknowledge, the darkness that lives underneath the polished surface. And most people project that shadow outward. They see their own insecurities in others. They criticize in others what they refuse to see in themselves. The man who calls everyone else a liar is usually hiding something. The woman who lectures about loyalty is often the one holding the sharpest knife. The loudest defender of honesty is sometimes the most calculated actor in the room. The lone wolf knows this. The lone wolf learned this not from Jung, but from watching people. Specifically from watching the gap between what people say and what they do 3 weeks later when the situation changes. The most generous person in the room is sometimes the most threatened by your success. The loudest champion of honesty is sometimes running 3 quiet agendas you won't discover until you're already in the middle of one. The lone wolf doesn't walk around assuming everyone is lying. He just doesn't assume that the first version of a person is the complete version. He waits, quietly, for the second version to show up, and it always does. Now here's the part that hits different. The real power move. The one that restructures every relationship it touches. Willingness to walk away. Not as a threat, not as a dramatic exit, just as a quiet, natural, inevitable response. Most people stay in relationships that drain them, in friendships that disrespect them, in situations that cost them their peace. Why? Because leaving feels like losing. Because leaving means facing the loneliness on the other side. Because staying keeps the connection alive even when the connection is toxic. Because walking away means there's no more hope of being understood. And most people can't live without that hope. So they stay, and they take it, and they tell themselves it's loyalty. When really, it's fear. But the lone wolf, when the tension builds, when the situation stops being worth their energy, when the cost outweighs everything, they leave. That quiet, unexplained removal of their presence is the most powerful thing a person can do to a dynamic, because the people left behind suddenly realize the thing they took for granted is gone. And they never even saw it coming, because they assumed the lone wolf needed them. The way everyone else did, they forgot. This one was never playing by those rules. The final truth, the part that ties it all together, here's what most people miss. The lone wolf is not trying to be powerful. They're not running a psychological strategy. They're not performing strength. They've just reached a place, through pain, through self-reflection, through a lot of quiet time with their own thoughts, where they need less. Less from people, less from situations, less from the world's constant performance of significance. And in a world where almost everyone is running toward more approval, more status, more connection, more validation, someone who is moving in the opposite direction looks like a threat. Nietzsche wrote about the individual who stops measuring himself by the standards of the herd. Not above the herd, not at war with the herd, just outside the system entirely, no longer using their ruler, no longer competing for their prizes, no longer needing their verdict to know what he's worth. That's not arrogance. Arrogance is still playing the game, still needing to win it, still defined by it even in opposition to it. This is something quieter, something the word arrogance was never built to describe. The arrogant man tries to rise above others. He needs to be higher, needs to win, needs you to see it. The lone wolf doesn't rise above. They step outside the entire structure. They stop measuring themselves on the ladder most people are desperately climbing. They don't need to be above you. They just need to be free, and that quiet freedom. That self-contained, low-dependency, emotionally sovereign way of existing reads as dangerous because society runs on mutual need. It runs on emotional hooks. It runs on the unspoken agreement that we all need each other's approval enough to keep behaving. When someone removes themselves from that agreement, the whole system doesn't know what to do with them. In a world full of people still looking outside themselves for meaning, for validation, for proof that they're enough, the person who has already found it inside themselves will always feel like something you can't quite get a grip on. And that is not arrogance. That's not coldness. That's not damage. That is the rarest, quietest, most misunderstood form of power that exists: self-containment. And here's the question that should sit with you after this. If everything you used to control the people around you suddenly stopped working, what would you do? Who would you even be? Most people will never ask themselves that, but the lone wolf already answered it. A long time ago. Alone. In the quiet. Where all the real work gets done. If this hit something in you, if it made you think of someone, or made you think of yourself, that's the point. Hit the like button. Not for me, to expand its reach to other lone wolves, because this kind of content doesn't survive without it. The algorithm buries what doesn't get engagement. And if this is the kind of conversation you think more people need to hear, then share. Subscribe if you want more of this. Dark psychology, philosophy that actually means something. Observations about human behavior that most people are too comfortable to say out loud. No fluff, no performance, just the truth, delivered cold. See you in the next one.